Uber drivers in Toronto are starting the process of unionization. Here's why that matters. Hey guys, hope you're having a great one. Thanks for stopping by again. If you've been following my channel and my work over the years, you know that I cover politics, but that I also have a passion for labor issues and labor rights. Because at the end of the day, working people are what drive this country and drive all countries. And that if working people don't have good conditions at work and don't have their rights respected, we do not have a just society and we do not have a real democracy. So it comes as no surprise that when it comes to Uber, I'm generally pretty, skeptical of the corporation because in so many ways, it's typical of two kind of key factors that have harmed workers for far too long. One is the general tech industry, which has proved resistant to unionization, not only for its high-paid workers, but even for its more contingent and precarious workers. I've talked a bit about this with the video game industry, where I made a video suggesting that workers in the video game industry need something above all, and that's a good union to protect them. Because even when they're paid well, issues of crunch time and workplace harassment and nepotism and work-life balance more generally are not respected, and a union would help make those things respected. And another factor is the gig economy. The gig economy has really exploded in the last few years. And for some people, that's seen as a positive because you can make a little bit of extra money around the side. But the main issue with the gig economy is that it has disrupted the traditional forms of union representation because the existing labor laws are not designed for the sort of skirting around labor laws that companies like Uber practice. And the biggest factor is their ability to kind of say, we're not actually an employee. Everyone who drives for us on our platform is a quote-unquote independent contractor. And as such, we have limited responsibilities to them in terms of providing benefits and job security and minimum wages and so on and so forth. But also, the labor legislation largely prevents them from forming a union. But what we're seeing in the last few days is news from Toronto that the United Food and Commercial Workers, the UFCW, is starting the process of unionizing Uber drivers in that city. And they're arguing a few key things. They're arguing, one, that these workers deserve fundamental baselines of compensation. That they deserve something of a minimum wage. That places like New York provide, gig economy app drivers basic labor standards, and those things could be applied in Toronto as well. Another factor they argue is that the employee-employer relationship between Uber and its drivers is clear. The fact that, you connect through the system, Uber can ultimately vet or unvet you. The rating system, which is often maligned by drivers for being so capricious and so unforgiving, allows Uber to effectively hire and fire drivers. The reality is that Uber is an employer. There's no way around this. I understand the law as it's written right now is that they're not an employer, they're an independent contractor. But any reasonable observer would understand that Uber is an employer of these drivers. 100%. They exert such immense control through use of the technology, through use of the app, that it can't be seen as anything other than an employee-employer relationship. And as such, our legal system and our labor law system needs to be updated to apply to those workers. So, whereas Uber, they suggest our technology, we're a tech company that has independent contractors who drive for us. UFCW is making the argument that what the Uber app is and what apps like it are effectively management apps. They're effectively tools through which employers can assign work and can manage their workers. And just like a manager would do in a face-to-face sense, or a corporation would do through some of their online programs and their networks, Uber is doing the same thing with their app. And this brings us to the fact that UFCW, regardless of the fact that these workers may not be formally unionizable right now, are working with these drivers, hundreds of them right now, and more joining every day, to help them fight for a better workplace. And that'll be, one, through fighting the legal code that allows Uber to skirt basic labor laws, fighting the legal code that allows them to misclassify themselves as independent contractor relationships instead of the employer-employee relationship they actually have. And it's going to fight for an update to the labor code to recognize that because they're employees, Uber drivers should have the right to unionize, which, as you know in Canada, is a basic human right because it is recognized under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is what we're talking about when we talk about unions reaching beyond the traditional basis to make social change. Often people will say unions are only trying to help workers so they can get dues, or that so they can increase their power, or so that they can increase their influence. But what UFCW is doing here is they're working with workers who, at least right now, aren't even legally unionizable. There's little benefit for the union in that immediate sense. You're dealing with precarious workers who are in a kind of experimental phase of employment status. And so UFCW is investing time and resources and political and social capital into helping these workers. And I think these workers realize that they need the help of the traditional labor movement to navigate this complex legal system. Uber drivers forming a union is fantastic. It is absolutely what is needed. And even if the process of updating the legal code takes time, the fact that they've expressed an interest in joining the labor movement and fighting for their rights as workers, not as individuals, but as a group, speaks highly of the future of that movement. And I can predict that in time, we're going to have to update our labor codes to match the gig economy. The gig economy cannot be allowed to use innovation or use, technological progress as an excuse to pay workers poorly or to not recognize they have a responsibility to workers and to communities and to the places in which they operate. These companies need to realize that they are not special. They're not any different than McDonald's or Harvey's or Walmart or any white-collar employer or any government employer. They need to be held to the exact same standards. And these workers pushing for formal recognition under labor codes, and they're pushing for formal recognition under trade union recognition and what have you, is a big first step. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see this new drive of people, whether it's talking about formal unionization or whether it's just being open about their bad workplaces in the tech industry, be it in the kind of traditional tech industry, video game workers, people who work at tech companies, or people who are, employed through these apps. Because the reality is that if this is the future of work, we're going to need mechanisms that protect workers in that future. And unions have had to do this for a long time. I've talked about this on this channel. Unions have transformed themselves many a time. It used to be the case that unions were only for a very narrow sliver of workers. But when factories got larger and larger and automation became more and more prominent, unions began to shift partially away from their pure focus on the skilled craftsmen, and they started organizing workers in a mass factory sense. Not just organizing one specific type of skilled welder, but actually organizing every single man, woman, and in some cases young person that worked in a factory. Whether they were quote-unquote skilled or quote-unquote unskilled. It didn't matter. And so today we face a new era potentially where the use of technological apps simultaneously decentralize the employer-employee relationship because you never actually see your boss. You never actually see your manager. But almost paradoxically, it centralizes it in a way like never before because everyone is being filtered through one algorithmic app located in the ether. And that app has such immense power over who gets rides, who doesn't, the rates of pay, the ability to be deactivated or activated. All of that gives immense power to the corporation. There's no other solution here but to one, recognize that Uber and companies like Uber are employers. Two, to ensure that because of that, all workers for these companies are covered under basic labor legislation. And that 3, because they are covered under basic labor legislation, and because we recognize that Uber is an employer, these workers be given their constitutional right to strike and bargain collectively. That's the path forward. So just to close, I want to applaud UFCW for doing this work, but above all, 100% above all, I want to applaud the Uber drivers themselves who are making this effort to form a union, not just in a traditional sense, but to fight for the overhaul of our legal system so that it matches the reality of employment in the 21st century. They are pioneers, and I don't think it's unreasonable that labor historians one day will write about this effort, and we'll all be greater off for it. Hey everybody, thanks for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed this. If you liked the video, please comment and subscribe, share it around. I really enjoy reading your comments and concerns. And it helps to spread the message, to let people know that companies like Uber can't just keep operating outside the law. They can't just keep using loopholes to mistreat their workers and shirk their responsibilities to communities. That the legal code needs to be updated, and Uber finally needs to be held responsible for the kind of social and economic havoc it wreaks. And if you can, I would appreciate your support on Patreon. Supporting me there brings a greater quality and quantity of content to this channel, and it brings a pro-labor voice to this platform, letting people know that in the 21st century, workers still have a role to play, and unions are still as important today as they have ever been. And before I close, I just want to know what you think. Do you think that Uber drivers and gig economy workers should be able to unionize? Why do you think that is? If you don't, I'd love to hear your rationale. What do you think some of the barriers are for these gig economy workers that don't exist for traditional workers? But do you think there are any opportunities for gig economy workers that maybe don't exist for traditional workspace workers? I'd love to hear that as well. So guys, thanks again for stopping by. I'll see you in the next video.